Welcome to the Heartbeat for Hire podcast. I'm your host, Lyndsay Dowd. My goal is to help train leaders and sales organizations how to manage and deliver results with empathy, compassion, and kindness. Let's get started. Welcome to this episode of Heartbeat for Hire. I always say a podcast is only as good as its guests, and today we have one of the best. Heather Moyse is a four-time Olympian, a two-time Olympic gold medalist, motivational speaker, empowerment coach, humanitarian, the author of Redefining Realistic, and is one of Canada's great multi-sport athletes. A four-time Olympian in two-man bobsleigh, Heather won gold at 2010 Winter Games in Vancouver and again at the 2014 Games in Sochi. Heather led Canada to silver in the 2013 Rugby Sevens World Cup. That's our second sport. And she became only the second Canadian and first Canadian female to be inducted into the World Rugby Hall of Fame. She represented Canada in a third international sport in 2012 when she placed top 5 in 2 events at the Pan Am Track Cycling Championships in Argentina. She has a master's degree in occupational therapy and is a highly sought after motivational speaker. Her best-selling book, Redefining Realistic, was released in 2017. I mean, I had to abbreviate this bio. There was so much to share. Welcome, Heather. So happy you're here.
Thank you for having me, Lyndsay. This is awesome.
Yeah, no problem. So before you became an amazing Olympian and super successful human, tell us a little bit about your start and your upbringing and kind of what inspired this drive.
First of all, I have to say that bio was a bit long. It does sound like I just can't make up my mind or can't make it, just hopping all over the place. I don't really cook. So obviously the time I spent doing all of those other things was not spent learning how to cook. So that's one thing. But anyway, how did all of this start? I grew up in Prince Edward Island, the smallest province in Canada off the East Coast. It's accessible only by a flight, like by a plane or a 13-kilometer bridge, which was actually a 45-minute ferry ride when I was growing up.
Yeah.
So somewhat isolated, right, from the rest of the country. And so I grew up in an academic family, played sports all my life, but I always thought sport was just going to be extracurricular to what I was going to do to earn a living. And also, when I grew up, there weren't people around me training to go to the Olympics or training to represent, Olympians. Those were TV people.
Right.
We weren't everyday normal people like I considered myself to be. So it's not that I actively thought, oh, I could never do that, but it just never occurred to me as being an option because it wasn't in my direct environment. It wasn't like I wasn't directly exposed to someone who was doing that. So it just didn't occur to me as being a possibility. So it wasn't actually until I was 27 when I started lifting weights and training for the first time and actually taking sports seriously. And that's because I was suddenly faced with this challenge of seeing if I could learn a new sport, learn to do it well, and learn to do it well in time to compete in the next Olympic Games, which were less than 5 months later. So this was bobsledding. So I was kind of faced with this crazy challenge. And to me, it was just a challenge that I couldn't pass it up. So that's what I did. I embraced this challenge just to see, what would happen. And then things kind of snowballed and my life kind of took a bit of a 180 and a lot of things changed. Yeah.
And so bobsledding was first and that wasn't enough. So you had to.
Well, rugby was first. I played rugby in high school, but and also at university. I played soccer, rugby, and did track and field at university. But it just, it was just, again, like I wasn't training then. I wasn't lifting weights. I was playing because I loved it. At the time with rugby, I didn't even know that we had a national women's rugby team until someone notified me that I had been spotted and added to this long list and invited to this development camp. I know. I was like, what? We have a national women's rugby team? Like it was an eye opener for me. But it also, all of those, like my story, I actually love in the sense that I'm able to shed perspective to other people, showing that if you are doing something because you truly love it, if you're passionate about it, if you are doing things without just the idea of achieving this kind of higher level of success, then your perspective along the whole way changes. So it's been pretty remarkable, actually.
I mean, there's so much to be said for mindset, right? And I know that I was joking with you that you were an overachiever, and you're like, no, that's not it at all. And explain what you were talking about, because
No, and some people think I'm an adrenaline junkie or an overachiever. And the overachievement, I think that comes with a mindset. Some people want to overachieve. They want to kind of reach all these higher levels. And to me, it was really never about the levels. It was really about the challenge.
Yeah.
And I realized it wasn't until then, I think I was kind of on that autopilot. I mean, yes, I was still at university, but that's because everyone in my family had gone to, like, I didn't really ever think that I wouldn't go to university or that there were other options. You just kind of, that was my environment. And so I stayed in it and made choices within the lanes, within that boundary. And then when all of a sudden I got this challenge of seeing if I could compete and represent my country in less than 5 months at the next Olympic Games, that's when I realized that I'm fueled and motivated by challenges. And that is because when someone thinks, when there's a possibility there, but then all of a sudden people around you, the naysayers that kind of want to pull you down and think that it's impossible or think that it's unrealistic, or all of these different terms we use, it kind of made me motivated to prove them wrong. But that being said, there is no guarantee for success. So when I talk to people about when they're setting their goals and these I guess trying to pursue their goals, the different mindsets and strategies for that is changing this goal from being a binary outcome, either you succeed or you don't, and changing that into more of a spectrum, setting your goal really high, and then just challenging yourself to see how close you can get, because that disempowers all the naysayers. It disempowers the negative voices we have in our heads, and just like, you know what? Yeah, I might not make it, but I sure as hell want to see how close I can get. So it becomes this more empowering statement that we can kind of repeat to ourselves every time we start doubting ourselves.
I love that. Now, I don't want to paint a false picture here. Let's not just think that Heather just decided, oh, I'm going to do bobsled and then I'm going to pivot to rugby. You had your fair share of setbacks. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I had some pretty severe career-threatening injuries. And not necessarily, some of them were career-threatening injuries within games or within matches, but also I had a couple of hip surgeries.
Me too.
Yeah. So that's a pretty serious recovery from that. And one of the hip surgeries I had was 6 months before I had to play in a rugby game, to prove that I would be okay enough to play in that 2013 Rugby Sevens World Cup. And exactly 9 months after my surgery, I had to test and qualify for the national bobsled team for the 2014 Olympic Games in Sochi. And there were people who certainly were very excited to know I was coming back before they found out I needed hip surgery, who then were not really in the picture again until after I did my testing and after I proved that I was still, the fastest brakeman in the country. And then all of a sudden this excitement comes back again. And you kind of, you see you start really seeing who people really are. And their true colors when. So it was interesting, but there were a lot of challenges. Yeah.
I think, for anyone starting something new, and I've certainly experienced this myself, and I imagine you had a lot of it too. You look at the people that are like, are you really sure you want to do this? And, that just negative overtone of like, it's the doubters. How do you handle that?
And sometimes an overtone, sometimes an undertone. It's true. It's true. Yeah. It's sometimes not even a word. It could be an eye roll or a shrug of the shoulders, or like when you're talking about it, they're like, like the sigh, the whole body roll, where they're just like, oh, she's talking about this again. Or the people who overtly are trying to discourage you, even though it's coming from a place where they of love, like they're hoping, they don't want you to get hurt, so they don't want you to do something that they think you're going to fail in,
right?
But that's not the attitude we want to have towards failure. And so we need to kind of re-empower ourselves and reframe all of those statements and questions, and we do need to disempower those naysayers, including the voices that we've kind of developed in our heads that stop us from moving forward. And once you can kind of get a handle on that, and then you're kind of become unstoppable.
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, you really got to push them to the side and not let them get under your skin.
I know.
So you have a fabulous quote, and it's, potential is just talent that you don't have yet. Talk about
Mm.
that, because I love that quote.
Yeah, I would love to say that that's my quote, but it's actually the exact words that a coach said to me. So I've adopted that and I've passed that on to a lot of people. When I was in high school, I'm sure with in high school and university, I was probably one of the most frustrating athletes to my coaches. Some people now would be like, oh my gosh, you must have been a gift to those coaches and blah, 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 blah. And and I probably in one way was, because they were excited about this naturally gifted athlete. And I can only say that now in hindsight. Like, actually, I was naturally gifted. At the time, I was just in it. I was just playing because I loved it. But I was also the epitome of wasting your talent because I didn't do anything with it. So I'll explain a little bit more about that in a second, because it comes down to self-esteem, self-image issues and all of that stuff too. But basically, I walked into my coach's office after our athletic banquet, and I had kind of this armful of trophies. And he turns around at his desk and he said, "Oh," and that, like, there wasn't really much of a conversation there. And I thought he was going to congratulate me or say something. And he just kind of shook his head and he just said, "Oh, Heather," he goes, just super exasperated, "you have so much potential." And I'm like, okay, he's being a bit weird, but like, okay, I'll take that as a compliment, right? You have so much potential, which is a compliment. And then I was about to leave and he said, "But you just need to know that potential is just talent that you don't have yet." And I was like,
Oh,
okay, he's being really weird, because that phrase, it kind of buried itself in my brain and it didn't come back to me until I started bobsledding years later. And I think that's where it was just like, if you don't give it 100%, and I don't just mean 100% of what you're asked to do, but 100% of what you're capable of, then you'll never actually know what you are truly capable of. And that quote that he said, "Potential is just talent that you don't have." I see people with tons of potential. Everybody has potential. And it's kind of what you choose to do with it, how much you choose to dig deep, and figure out, really, like, when you start learning how to call out your own excuses. God, we are so good. We are so good at excuses, but we rationalize them, of course. Of course, they're not excuses, they're reasons, right? So once we can rationalize those, then of course they're not excuses anymore.
Oh.
But yeah, of course not. So when we can start learning to recognize those and calling our own excuses out, then we can become pretty powerful in what we're able to accomplish. Yeah.
So let's pivot to coaching, because you've had some pretty amazing coaches and you are a coach. So why, or maybe share some of the best lessons you learned from coaches. Obviously that one was huge, but share some others.
Yeah, that was a pretty big one. That, again, I didn't really internalize it until later, but it had a huge impact for me. I had another, so even though I'm coaching people more in terms of their life goals, their, some of it's fitness, some of it's health, some of it's career, some of it's business, some of it's life balance, a little bit. I had a trainer. He's amazing. And he wasn't with the team. He was a trainer in Toronto, and he would get the programs that we would all be sent these programs. And he would say, "This is your program. Have they ever met you? Like, this doesn't look like a program for you, for your body, for your type, for your, your nervous system, this doesn't look like a program that's designed for you. And this is the national team program." And I was like, yeah, guess so. So he would ask me what this exercise is, how it's going to benefit. And then some of it, he'd be like, "You don't need this one." And then the next one, he'd be like, "Oh, I know what they're trying to do here, but I've got a different one that'll help you better, or work on using your strengths and like developing your weaknesses." And he just made me realize more so than anything that you can't fit a square peg into a round hole. And he also taught me to look at the big picture instead, when we get so caught up in the little things. So there was one summer right before the Vancouver Olympics in 2010, and it was the first summer in a while that I hadn't been injured. So I finally, and because I didn't start lifting weights until I was 27, of course, I'm doing these things and learning these things. And so this would have been the first summer that I could have actually done power cleans. So I was like, okay, great. Power cleans are one of the top basically one of the top lifts that people do, like the one of the most important lifts that bobsledders do. And so I said, great, I'm gonna do power cleans and yada yada. So I'll be all ready for testing. And he's like, I'm not going to teach you power cleans. I said, what do you mean you're not going to teach me power cleans? Like, I need to know, I need to know how to do power cleans. He said, no, you don't. I said, it's in the testing. Like I'm like panicking, going, oh my gosh, this is the
wrong guy.
Yeah. What do you mean? What do you mean you're gonna? He said, Heather, when you come to me and tell me that you want to go to the Olympics for powerlifting, then I'll teach you how to do power cleans. But until then, I'm going to help you just become a good bobsledder. And I was like, and he said, Heather, if you do not do power cleans, but you go and you do the push testing and you still beat everyone in push testing and you're the fastest, they're not going to not take you because you don't know how to do power clean. So he said they would be like, they'd have if you were the fastest at what the actual job is, they're not going to not take you because you don't know how to do one lift. And so I was like, oh, okay. So
that's good logic. All right.
So I mean, I followed his lead and he was brilliant. So he kind of made me look at big picture instead of being caught up in little things. And also it reminded me of my training as an occupational therapist, because still, even with that, and what I use with my clients a lot of the times is sometimes it's not the actual outcome that we want. Mm-hmm. It's something with a feeling or something else that's buried in there that you can get doing something totally different. Or you can achieve the same outcome, but taking a completely different route or path to get there. It doesn't have to look like what everyone else's looks like. So he really,
that's such a good story, Heather. And I have a management methodology that I use. It's so similar. And what I tell managers you have to do as a leader, you have to say, how can I be the best manager for you? Mm-hmm. And everybody has different needs. It's based on age, tenure, experience, career goals. And if you're not taking the time to understand what your people need, how could you possibly, you can't manage them all the same. You can't parent all the same. People are different. They have different needs. And I love that he recognized that the workout was not prescriptive to what you needed. And, it's nice to have a general guideline, as all companies do. But when you are trying to get the best out of people, you have to make it personal. And I love that.
So Lyndsay, it's the same thing as we are going back to kind of a sports environment. You know how we see all the time, or experience all the time, these coaches or captains who have the team huddle right before going out, and they're like pumping up the team and like psyching everyone up. And some people are saying, this is it. This is the game that matters. Right. This is it. It comes down to this. It's all like do or die, like blah, 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 blah. Well, for some people that is essential for them to get their adrenaline or arousal levels up to their peak performance level. And for other people, they do not need that pep talk to get their adrenaline going that high. So all of a sudden that pep talk is pushing them past, and they're now going down on the bell curve, and their performance is now going down. They're all of a sudden could be the best players on the team, and yet they're making mistakes, doing things that they've never done before, or, it's because they're all of a sudden, so it's kind of passing. So for people who are on those kinds of teams, it's almost like helping them figure out what can they do to then within minutes bring themselves back down to being back on that line so that they're directly under their peak level of performance. And it's a really cool experience working with people. And that's whether they're going into a job interview, whether they're going into a presentation where their entire career could be resting on this. All of these things it's all about energy management, mental management, figuring out, putting things in perspective, pulling things back. It's the same thing as downplaying the importance of the Olympic Games and what that means to other people, just in order to
manage,
be able to get through it. Hey, this is just another race. This is just another race. And it just happens to be on this particular track, like downplaying it so that I can actually execute what I'm physically able to execute.
Well, because the pressure would swallow you, like if you let it. So you have to be able to compartmentalize and kind of, just be present, be grounded. And okay, so you obviously had an amazing example in that coach, and you're a coach. So could you share some of your success stories and maybe how you've implemented some of these things?
Yeah, well, a lot of it, I mean, I can share generalizations, obviously, but it depends. For some people, a lot of what I do is helping people break down their start. So for a lot of people, they don't even know where to start. They don't know how to start. They don't know. Sometimes they don't even think they can start because they have these assumptions and self-limiting beliefs that have been preventing them from even. So it's kind of really actually more things that are blocking them to getting there. Sometimes it's just so that they can see a path to go there. Sometimes it's figuring out those questions that can challenge their limiting beliefs every time it kind of stops them in their ways. So, I mean, it's been great. Some of my clients have had fitness challenges or health challenges and fitness goals that they've had.
Sure.
For some, it's been kind of breaking free and from that autopilot working 9 to 5 job to have an art studio in their house, and breaking down some of the comments that they internalized from maybe a parental figure when they were little, making them believe that they could never be successful in this area. So kind of unpacking a lot of that stuff. But a lot of it is just challenging those assumptions and challenging those self-limiting beliefs and putting them in a position where that allows them not to be fearful of the trying part. Because it's actually not failure that we fear. We all talk about, oh, fear of failure. Well, it's not failure that we fear at all. It is what we assume failure will bring. Yeah. We really fear judgment, isolation, ridicule. Sure. We fear being segregated from other people. Like we fear being lonely and being kind of outcasted. And that's what we fear. It's not actually failure. If we celebrated failure, nobody would fear it, right? We'd embrace it. Okay. So it's kind of trying to reframe what that looks like and how rejection is really only whatever we internalize. Otherwise, it's really has no bearing on anything. So a lot of what I do with my clients is reframing things and challenging some of those beliefs that are blocking them, and then really helping them break down the entire process to get to their goal, placing them on timelines and breaking down all the steps and strategies so that they can actually see the path that gets there. And a lot of people have trouble. They see these insurmountable goals that they have, and they've made them insurmountable in their minds because they're so important to them. But when you take it from a third party and you can break those goals down, they're just like, wait a second, it's literally a checklist. Once you break it down far enough, it's a checklist. And once you start checking off those boxes, it becomes very empowering for them.
Yeah, and then they can feel the progress. Yeah.
You can see it, you can feel it. Yeah.
That's great. So I think you gave a really good transition to your book. So can we talk a little bit about redefining realistic?
Yes. And what I love actually because of that book, I've actually had people I haven't directly coached, but have sent me things that they have done or accomplished because of reading that book. And that is to me pretty rewarding because they've taken just what I've written on paper and they've internalized that and kind of empowered themselves with things that I've written in there. And that's been pretty cool. I've had people say, oh my goodness, I thought I would be too old to do this. And I actually now did a triathlon and went on this. I don't know. There's so many little tidbits that I've gotten that are really, really, really cool.
But I just like the mentality of that. Like now I think more than ever, we're at this inflection point in our just collective world culture where you can do anything. And, if you set your mind to it, what's to say it's unrealistic? I mean, look at the things that you've accomplished and, you weren't intending on becoming an Olympian. You went and got a master's, and we'll talk about that in a second. But you put your mindset in that direction and you went and did it. And I look at all of these millennials who are they figured out a niche, they focused on it, and they made these incredible paths for themselves. And I chuckle because I work with a lot of people who have been doing their thing for 20 plus years, and they feel they are at the top of the mountain. But here comes this 20 something who has millions of followers and who has just as much street cred. And that's pretty unnerving for someone who's been at it for a long time. But it's so important because the balance has shifted. So
I know
it's
the balance has shifted. And it is cool though, because this whole my book, I called it Redefining Realistic, because when someone says, a lot of dreams are squashed, even when people are kids. Like, I don't know why adults feel the need to tell someone when they're 4 that they'll never grow up to become a chickadee. Like, okay, like that's really going to happen, right? Like, why do we have to say, oh, stop me? Like,
Yeah,
stop
let them
being
be.
so unrealistic. Like, are you really worried that they might try? Like why do we have to just stop that? Instead, it's an opportunity. And that literally was my sister. She wanted to grow up to become a chickadee. My parents were not worried that that would really happen. No. You know, and she's now an ER doctor and she's doing quite fine. So
she did all right.
I think it's okay. But what my parents did do, anytime that happened, without realizing at the time even what they were doing, was they were teaching us either how to break down goals or they were teaching us about visualization in the moment. So something like that with a chickadee, all my parents would say was, oh, wow, that would be interesting. What's the first thing you would do if you were a chickadee? So all of a sudden my sister's like, oh, well, if I were a chickadee, I would, you know, and then there goes the imagination. There goes the visualization of in that moment.
Well, and that helps her get to really where she really wants.
And if I said, oh my goodness, I want to be an astronaut. Oh my goodness, what do you think it would take for you to be an astronaut? And then I'm like, oh, I think I would have to learn this. I think I would have to learn this. You know, I'd have to be good at this probably, you know. And so as kids, it develops your ability to break things down, to actually figure out the components that are needed to accomplish things. It teaches you visualization, like all these things that my parents, well, I'll say they were unaware of it, but maybe they were very aware of it, but just the things that there was no need to say, like, I mean, I probably changed what I wanted to be when I grow up like 5 times a day, right? So there's not really any need to squash that by saying, oh, like only boys do that, or only whatever do that, or only, like, I never had that. And so for me, it's not so much necessarily encouraging kids, and that's a component too in and of itself, but it's more important to not discourage kids. Kids are naturally gifted with creativity and with ambition, and I think if we could just stop discouraging them and squashing dreams or goals or visualize it, like whatever, with our own definition of what realistic means, because that's very subjective. And so if someone is just kind of squashing that, then the possibilities just kind of get squashed with it. So I guess not everyone, I've realized over the years, you know, when you grow up, you're in your bubble, you're in your family, and you kind of think that everyone has
like this. Yeah.
Everyone's is like that. So, you know, it's the same thing as when there may be some not great things happening in a family bubble, they think everyone's dealing with the same thing or whatever. So I really thought that everyone had supportive families. Like, I thought everyone had parents who encouraged them. I thought everyone had like parents who would go and support them at their games or help them with a science project or, you know, do whatever. And it wasn't until I went to university that I realized that like some of my teammates had never had a family member go to any of their games, or that they had to hide that they were playing sports because their mom wanted them to do, they were supposed to be doing something else. And I was dumbfounded. Yeah. And so then I realized that if I have achieved the things that I've achieved, because it's not that I've been afraid of failure or not afraid of failure. I just knew I had a safety net of people who loved and supported me, regardless of whether I was successful at it or not. And so for me, it was important to be that person for people who don't necessarily have that available to them, and to be able to show the possibilities, right? Like to be that support system and remind them, like, okay, so what if you don't make it all the way to the end? What is the work? Like, what happens? I'm pretty sure that you still have the same amazing personality, the same friends who are around you, the same, like, there are just different things that our own thought processes will stop us. Yeah. And I just really love that I'm in a position now where I get to challenge some of those things. And then I can provide those aha moments for people, and they can be like, well, I don't know why I've been thinking that, or I don't really know now why, now that you're putting it that way.
If they've never had the support and the allowance to think that way, they don't know how. And I talk about manifestation a lot. And I think visualization and manifestation go hand in hand. And, you know, making that list or creating that vision board of the possible, of this is what I want to look like. This is what I want to feel like. This is the emotion that I want to be having when I accomplish this. And, you know, getting really specific with that puts it out there and gives you a target. And I just think it's for people that have never been allowed to think that way. It's so important. It's so
I
cool.
agree. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about your master's and why you felt like you had to get it, and where was that in the time frame of your life with the Olympics? And was it before the Olympics or?
Kind of. So after my undergrad, I did a Bachelor of Science with the honors in kinesiology. And after I finished that, I went and I worked in Nova Scotia for a little while, and for about 8 months. And I worked in a hotel, like nothing career degree related. Loved it because I was meeting new people. And then I decided I'd go to travel in Europe, and just for a little bit. So I got a visa, like a workers, young workers holiday maker visa. I bought a Eurail pass. And then on my flight over there, I met someone who had grown up kind of near where I had grown up. And she lived in Ireland, and she said, well, why don't you come stay with me? You could rent one of our rooms. And my fiance, his siblings went there, and I was like, great. So I went there. I did no traveling anywhere outside of Ireland. I stayed there. I got a job. I found a rugby club within 3 days. I was at a rugby practice. I had a job within 2 weeks, and I just stayed there for about 5 or 6 months. And then I went home because I got an internship position as a disability sports program officer to work in Zimbabwe. And I was like, great, disability sports program officer. I've already worked with people with disabilities. I love that. It's in Africa. I've always wanted to do development work. Perfect. So I come home because there's an orientation, and I find out that that changed to go to Trinidad. So instead of Zimbabwe, they changed my placement to be in Trinidad, which wasn't a big deal. But before I left, I all of a sudden got this random phone call from a track coach at a different university. And he said, I knew him through competing against his athletes. And he said, Heather, I've been asked to do recruiting for Eastern Canada for bobsledding. And I was like, who does bobsled? Like, what, who does that? And so he just said, as soon as I was asked to do that, you are the first person that came to mind. I think you'd be perfect. You have the ideal combination between strength and speed. And I just said, yeah, Dana, I don't know. I'm not interested. I'm good. Like I'm good. Thanks. And he just said, Heather, the Olympics are in less than a year. I know who's in the program. You'd be going to the Olympics for sure. And I said, I'm okay. Like I could tell by the way he said that going to the Olympics had always been his dream. It had never been my dream. Mm-hmm. So I didn't grow up watching sports on TV unless there was a random football playoff game. And then my dad wanted to see. And so I would just vote for the uniform I liked the best, like you're just cheering for I like they're in purple. I'll go for that or whatever. Or they have a horse on their uniform. So we didn't watch sports on TV. I didn't grow up watching sports on TV. So it wasn't this thing. Like, I mean, I'd watched, I watched a couple of events in the Olympics, but not really. So anyway, I just said, no, I'm good. That had not been a dream of mine, but working in a developing country had always been a dream of mine. So I was following my dream, just not society's definition of success, like of elevated success. So I was good. I ended up living and working in Trinidad for almost 3 years. And then I moved back to Canada to do my master's degree in occupational therapy. And it's a 2-year professional program. And 1 year into that program, I all of a sudden ran into that same recruiter at my former track coach's retirement party. So exactly 4 years after that phone call. And he said, Heather, I think you're like, I can't believe you didn't do it. I still think you could. I know you're older now, so it'd be a lot harder, and I was like, oh God, here we go. So he said, I still think you should do it. And I just said, oh God, Dennis, I'm not going to just send me the information. Like, I'll look at the test. I'll do the testing camp maybe. So I went and did the testing camp thinking I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to do the testing camp, get him off my back, finish my master's degree. I'll be fine. And I ended up breaking one of their testing records. Yeah. So I was just like, what do you mean? Like, these are tests that I had done before.
Right.
So fortunately I missed the first day of testing. The first day of testing, they said I could miss because I had rugby nationals. And so I was going to be tied up. And fortunately I did, because that was all weightlifting and I'd never lifted weights before. But the second day was all like speed work and sprinting through timing lights, pulling a weighted sled, plyos, power stuff. still, I'd never done any of those tests before, but at least I wasn't going to crush myself with a bar trying to pretend like I knew what I was doing. So yes, so that was different. And I ended up breaking the record for the sled pull, like through the timer lights. And I just was like, you mean to tell me I've broken a record amongst these people who've been training for years and who are supposed to be representing us at the next Olympics in 5 months? Like the Olympics were 5 months later. So I had to go back to Toronto and talk to my faculty advisor and ask him if he could help me somehow apply for a year, like a year leave of absence.
Pause. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I just step away? He goes, well, normally we don't do that, but you took some time away from rugby last year just for a couple of weeks. And normally they don't even do that, but you still academically did well. So maybe they'd approve it. I was like, oh gosh. So anyway, they approved it. I took the 1 year, just this year, to do this challenge. And it was, basically it was the Olympic season, and I competed in my first Olympic Games in Torino. And then a few months later after that, well, I guess at the end of the summer, was also my first Rugby World Cup, the 15 Rugby World Cup for the national rugby team. So it was a pretty busy year. Yeah. There wasn't, when people say, well, what about your off season? Well, when you're playing 2 sports for Canada, there's not really an off season, but yeah, it was a pretty big year. And it was just, someone's like, how did you're not, like 5 months. It's so unrealistic or unlikely or highly unlikely. So here's something I talk to people about. Highly unlikely still does not mean impossible.
Right.
And so if you embrace a challenge and just say, yeah, you know what, you're right. I might not make it, but I just really want to see how close I can get. Then that is kind of re-empowers you. It gives you the power, takes the power away from the naysayers. And yeah, that's how it started.
Oh my God, it's such a cool story. So I want to pivot and talk about, you have a huge humanitarian presence. And I know that's such a big part of your life. And you talked a little bit about your time in Trinidad, but you work with a number of organizations, and you got a pretty massive award and recognition from Canada. I mean, it was the Randy Starkman Olympian Humanitarian Award, the Queen's Jubilee Medal, and the Order of PEI, the highest honor to be bestowed in any province in Canada. Those are amazing. So why is doing this kind of work so important to you, and what does it do for your soul?
Yeah, I think that's it. It warms my soul. Like there's nobody who can do a random act of kindness for someone else and leave not feeling good about it. Like there's like that's an like I challenge someone, go do a random act of kindness and see if it doesn't make you feel good. So, I mean, pardon?
It's impossible.
It is impossible. Like if you're feeling awful, or you're feeling really crappy, or you're feeling like nothing's going right, then go through a drive-through and pay for the person behind you. And then see how it lifts your day up. Like it's impossible. And so I just feel, especially the more I've traveled around the world, the more I've lived around the world, there's so much to be grateful for.
So true.
And it is very easy to slide into a place of complacency where I'm just in this position because I am, without actually realizing that I am very fortunate to be surrounded by incredible people, by having had a supportive family my whole life growing up, it's remarkable. And sometimes I just think that some people need a boost, some people need a lift, and sometimes that lift is for me. And that means me helping other people. So I've been really lucky. I helped build a house in Mexico over a weekend, like for a family who's never had a front door before. I climbed the highest mountain in Antarctica to raise money and awareness for our Canadian war vets who are transitioning back to civilian life after it's over, and to raise awareness for PTSD, PTSI now, which actually kind of opened the doors and opportunities for me to actually have a relationship with the Canadian military, which has been really remarkable. Like has given me opportunities that I never thought I would have before.
Love that.
I think that when I was in Trinidad, I started a sports leadership development camp for kids who are deaf and hearing impaired from islands around the Caribbean. And you kind of leave it, when you leave it there with a local committee, and you hope that you've set it up and it's, good to go. And and you leave and you just hope that you've left it solid. And I mean, I'm sure it's morphed and taken on a life of its own, but they just had their 20th year of doing that. Like I suddenly stumbled across Camp Able on Facebook and I'm like, those people have no idea who started it. And I don't need the recognition for it, but I know, like, I'm just like, they're still doing this 20 years later after I started it. I know. I love it.
I mean,
it's been remarkable.
One of the questions I love to ask, and you've already kind of said it a few different ways, but what do you want your legacy to be? I mean, you've already left your mark in so many places, but if someone was going to look up Heather Moyse, what would you want them to see?
I think I would want, like, what I hope that I've instilled in other people, probably
any way you interpret it.
Yeah, would be, if they think of me, it helps them break free from, all of a sudden, it reminds them to start questioning their assumptions, challenging their self-limiting beliefs, and questioning their fears, so that they don't sell themselves short. Basically, it's about not selling yourself short, and also being in a place where you can look back in your life and really have no regrets in terms of what you've pursued versus what you've stopped yourself from pursuing. Because really, if the regrets don't come from failure, the regrets come from not trying or not pursuing, and all with the wondering, like the what if, like, what if I had tried? What if I had tried? That's where we get those solid, pieces that are kind of pulling at our hearts and souls that have dragged us down. So that would be it. It would be like, think of me and be like, okay, I need to challenge my excuses and not sell myself short. And that is,
I love it. And I am like, I'm so sad that we're limited on time, because I could just keep going for like hours.
Right? Talk for so long.
But how do people find more on you? Because I mean, Heather's a speaker, an author, humanitarian, all these things. And you can read all about it at your website. So give them the link.
Yeah, it's just heathermoyse.com. It's pretty easy. If you can't remember how to spell my last name, you can just look up Heather Bobsledding Canada, and it will direct you to me. And that's the same, my Instagram handle and Facebook, all of it's under the same thing, at Heather Moyse. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and you're a great follow on Insta. I've been following you for a while. So I love your content. So you guys, Heather is a total joy. Check her out. And you've been an absolute pleasure. And thank you for being a guest on our podcast.
Oh, I love it. We'll have to do it again.
Would love it. Thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed today's episode. Stay tuned for more. Thanks for listening to Heartbeat for Hire. If you like what you hear, I'd love it if you'd subscribe and leave a 5-star review. To keep the conversation going, you can find me on Insta or at LinkedIn at Lyndsay Dowd, H4H, or you can reach me at my website, heartbeatforhire.com. Thanks so much. Have a great day.